doing and have them start thinking about building.
Do you, when you think about good research questions, and your colleague who says, the money question, there are probably people who are going to see this interview and go, that's frustrating to me that it has to be attached to policy or money, that there may be other things that right now are not on the scope of policymakers or don't bring a big economic bang, but they're still important issues. Do you have thoughts about that?
I think they're right. I just think that it's up to them to make the argument why it is important. That you're right. Not everything has to be linked to health economics or,
right.
or whatever. And there's certainly issues in social justice and some other
right.
issues that are harder to justify economically. But I think that they can justify it on other grounds. But it's up to them to make that justification. In their paper, they need to spend 2 or 3 or 4 paragraphs making a pretty compelling argument why this really is important.
Mm-hmm.
And for some, it's easy. I mean, for an economics thing, to say that marital conflict is linked to higher healthcare utilization, well, that's a pretty easy. I mean, that's pretty easy. And it might take. So in other research questions, it might take more work to make that point. Mm-hmm. But it's on them to make the argument, I think. Mm-hmm. Just because it's interesting to them does not necessarily make it a compelling research question.
Right. Well, are there other things that you would say, perhaps things I haven't asked you about, that good research questions, or what? Let me follow up with this question. What do you see? I mean, as you mentor students, how do you see that process from students going from asking maybe very basic research questions to more important research questions or better research questions? How do you see that developmental process go? What helps students get to that place?
I think that we as professors need to be the gatekeepers for that. We need to be mentors, and they come up with a question and most of the especially beginning doctoral students are pretty new to this enterprise, and they don't really know what is, and so it's up to us to help them and send back their research questions. Say, this has promise. Help me understand why this is important. Make an argument. The analogy when I teach this in my classes is I say that it's like you're in a court of law and you're making your opening statement to the jury, and in this because that's the way an introduction is to a paper.
Right.
And so in your opening statement you make a compelling argument why this person's guilty or innocent,
yeah.
and then as the case unfolds, then you have a chance to do your literature review, which is all the detail, all the evidence to support the statement you made briefly in your introduction. And I see that as the way we need to write research papers. Is in the introduction we make a 1 or 2 paragraph statement about why this is an important question, and then later in the literature review we flesh that out and provide substantial documentation. But it's got to be a compelling argument. And so I teach my students that if you don't make that argument to me, then I'm going to throw out the case. Mm-hmm. And I kind of use that metaphor with them because for most of them, writing a paper is a complete mystery. But they've watched enough Law and Order shows on television. They get the idea of a court
establishing a case.
Right. So that's why I send it back. Say, build me a case, make a compelling argument why this is an important question. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that make 2 or 3 iterations before they get there. Mm-hmm. But I think that's what we need to do as professors.
Well, oftentimes a person new to research will say, I want to research, and then they'll throw out a topic, child abuse or trauma, and these what really turn out to be these huge areas of research. How do you get them to focus more in one area? And cut.
That's hard.
Like we'll interview people to come to the program,
right.
And they'll say, "Oh yeah, I've got a research interest. I want to do something on child maltreatment or child abuse or alcoholism." But there are people who will spend an entire career on, one very specific aspect of alcoholism or of child maltreatment, or and would you want, the student to graduate from your program? Would you want them to be able to identify very specific and have that kind of nailed down before they leave? Would that be a goal?
Yeah, I think it's important. Well, oftentimes they do because they don't know that they don't know the literature that well, so they kind of come with a broad topic. I think the first thing they do is they need to read read the literature a little bit, really immerse themselves in that literature, and find out what has been studied, what hasn't been studied. And I think as they read it, they start learning that certain researchers take on certain aspects of it, and what aspects have been pretty thoroughly researched, where are the gaps. But I think you have to read that. The reading does two things. One is it helps them understand that really is the research enterprise. It's just taking a small piece of it. And the other thing is they read it, then they learn where the gaps are.
Yeah.
And then they can come back much more informed. But for that to be an opening thing, I want to study child abuse. I want to study relationship conflict and depression. That's an opening. That's a good opening. So I have them go read, and they read the different scholars, and they kind of figure out what's done out there, and then they can kind of come back and say, well, this part's never been done before. This has been done with marital couples, but we don't know about cohabiting couples. It's just, and that helps them narrow it down, I think, as they read.
Do you talk at all about having a passion for the topic? Because there are some people who might go after the money variable because it's like, well, that's what's attractive, that's what's going to get a lot of attention, but maybe they're not passionate about it.
Right, you got to have passion. You have to have passion, because if you have passion, it becomes a labor of love. It almost becomes a detective mystery story, and you really want to keep turning the pages to find out who done it, And if you have passion for the topic, then it makes the whole research enterprise enjoyable and fun. So it has to be the two. It's got to contribute, and you have to have some passion. If you have those two things, then you got a great paper, I think, and some decent data.
Yeah, you need some data. So have you had an experience where you've had a student who had a topic that their passion they weren't on that passion, and yet they felt, I've got to ride this out for whatever reasons. I need to be done with school. I need to finish this dissertation. But when the student or the individual who's doing the research isn't passionate, what happens with that?
If they're not passionate about the likelihood that they'll finish either their dissertation or that paper or whatever, it's just so diminished. And my experience is that oftentimes happens when the professor assigns them a topic. Either as a research assistant, or part of their program of research. The part of their research they need is this paper right over here, and so they assign the student that paper. And if it's not mutually compassionate, then it's just not going to work. So what I typically do is I kind of know my program of research. I know it's hot. I know the field well enough. That's what professors need to guide a little bit. We know the field well enough that we know where the next step is in some of these areas, and so. What I usually do is I usually give them 3 or 4 choices. I say, here are my 2 or 3 data sets, and if they want to, they can collect their own data. Here are my 2 or 3 data sets. Here's 3 or 4 questions I think that are publishable, that are hot, that people would care about. Is there one of those that you might be interested in? If they have that choice, then they're much more invested in it. Otherwise, it's like my father when I was younger just telling me to go weed the garden. I had no investment. I had no passion. I just would go out there and do a mediocre job. The weeds would grow back 2 days later, and because it wasn't my garden. So we can pick out a topic that we both care about, that we both have some passion about. It fits my program of research. It's something that they care about. Then it's going to become a win-win situation, and they're going to go for it. But assigning a student a topic just rarely works.
Okay. All right. Anything else, Rick, that you would want to add about asking good research questions?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot.
Sorry I got stuck a couple